Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. The topic is Epilepsy and Culture, proudly brought to you by Epilepsy South Africa, sponsored by Sanofi. I'm Charlene Castle, the National Director, and your host for this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our exciting panelists today. On my left, I've got Michael. Michael is a gentleman living with epilepsy, and Michael was a panelist and a guest of ours last year when we dealt with epilepsy and culture as well. So Michael, thank you for joining us all the way from Free State.
Thank you, Charlene, and thank you for the whole team, and I'm happy to be here again to share the knowledge and share the stories with the wonderful panel and the world out there. And yeah, it feels like home. Coming back here.
Thank you, Michael. So our next guest today, our special guest and a dear friend, is Phuti Mabelebele. Phuti is from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability that reports to the President's Office, and it's just such a privilege to have you with us today, Phuti, and hear your valuable insights.
Thank you very much, and greetings to participants and everyone in the panel. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. Solly Mokgata is our branch director for Epilepsy South Africa's Free State and Northwest branch. Solly, wonderful to have you, and thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Charlene, for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be amongst these esteemed people to be able to share about this very important subject today.
Thank you, Solly. And our neurologist today is coming from Netcare Mill Park, and thank you so much for joining us, Dr. V Mandita. V, wonderful to have you, and thank you for bringing your knowledge and your incredible self today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. Looking forward to it.
Great. So jumping straight in, you'll see some of the beautiful, vibrant colors in our webinar today. We are celebrating Heritage Month. We are South African, and it's this wonderful, wonderful month of September. So jumping straight in, I wanted to ask Phuti, what is this importance of Heritage Day in South Africa? How does this contribute Heritage Day in celebrating diversity and culture and what it means to us? Why are we sitting here today?
Thank you, Charlene. I think of utmost importance is to take us back and remember what Nelson Mandela did when we became a democracy. He emphasized a lot about us being a rainbow nation, and it was due to the fact that we are a diverse a nation, and we need to appreciate and begin to see that diversity as wealth for us, our sense of identity and the richness that's there in our different cultures as we have them in South Africa, and the rainbow nation that we are, and to see the uniqueness all over the world of what makes us a unique people in South Africa. And it's for that reason that South Africa then selected that September should be our Heritage Month, and it coincides very well with spring. You know, the colors, the colors that reflects in our different cultural diversities and so forth. So it coincided very well with September. But of utmost importance is about us socially cohesing, the social cohesion aspect of it, appreciating one another along the spirit of Ubuntu.
Thank you, Phuti. And I think, what's coming to mind as you're talking is that we're in the throes of the Rugby World Cup. We're in the throes of Heritage Month. And you mentioned Madiba, and I mean, he came out onto the rugby stadium all those years ago, and rugby unites us too as a nation, right? So celebrating the culture diversity. I'm going to jump straight to you, Yeswe, and just say to you, so many people don't understand what epilepsy is. So many people, particular cultural beliefs, the beliefs based of fear. So can you dispel some of these? What is epilepsy? How does it happen? Types of seizures? Just give us your expertise on this.
In a nutshell, epilepsy is a disease where one is prone to having seizures. And in having those seizures, they can emanate from any part of the brain. And the way they present depends on which part of the brain they come from. So people tend to be generally used to the loss of consciousness and the convulsion afterwards. And I found more and more when I speak to my patients that the other areas or presentations of epilepsy people are not aware of and thought, they are part of some other symptomatology. So I think that the discussion around epilepsy is important because then we can tell people what to expect and define a seizure as per region of the brain.
What is a seizure?
So a seizure, our colleagues like to joke and say we are glorified electricians.
I love that. I'm going to copyright that.
So, it's really about current. Brain cells just move current through from the brain to the limb affected, and you get a movement or you get some sort of effect. But it all starts with current. So if you have, if electricity is the analogy, if you have a high voltage, high as in abnormally high for that particular area, you get excessive action or movement. So hence the convulsion, because the motor area is affected. Loss of consciousness, because the area of consciousness gets affected. So depending on the area of the brain, something as simple as a laugh, something as simple as not being able to get a word out can be a seizure. So it's just when it happens, I'll say in inverted commas, inappropriately without your doing.
Okay.
And excessively, then it's a seizure.
Okay. So, yeah, I think as a person living with epilepsy myself, I always talk about, and sometimes the easiest way for me to explain it to people is like, okay, you get a cramp in your limb or your big toe and you lie there going, oh, it's so sore. I'm going, well, I get that cramp in my brain. And everyone kind of goes, I see, you just can't see it and you can't, you don't understand, and you just understand that that's what's happening. So often simplifying it right down is just makes, it also dispels that fear, right, of what is happening here.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm going to jump to Michael on my left in his beautiful attire today. Thank you for making the effort. Michael, just tell us a bit about your life with epilepsy. Tell us about the culture you grew up in. You've shared with me it's rural Free State. Just share with us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Particularly, I was born in Northwest, but later raised in Free State in Paris, as the dynamics of that years, my family had to move to Paris, to Free State, and yeah, I've been doing up and down from Free State and Northwest. Before I was correctly diagnosed, because I was correctly diagnosed by when I was 17. But prior that, I went through different diagnoses, per cultural and also the Western side. The cultural meaning that I'm from the royal family and deeper traditional family. We are most deeper in the traditional, and basically also the Catholics and other family members they are Zionist apostolates. So, in a nutshell, I was like elaborate for every family member because they wanted to help. So everyone went to the different ideas of traditional healers come and diagnose and say, and then they also, those traditional healers, they came up with the diagnosis, and now we as a family, we stuck. We don't know what's the problem, and they don't know. Whenever I had a seizure, they didn't know what to do, and some of the family members and the society started to stigmatize me. They started to reject me, and I remember when I was about 10 years, 10 years, I went out. I love camping, I love going out on school trips. Then I ended up living alone in a corner. They almost forgot me that I'm part of the school kids that are going to the field.
So they isolated you.
Yes, they isolated me, and then one of the teachers remembered, no, where is Michael? Where's Michael? Then that's when they remembered I was there. Then I came. When we got back home, then I found out now it was a little bit of conflict. They say my mom was deciding to take me to try the Western medicine side. And then remember, I'm from the deep-rooted traditional family. They didn't believe in Western much.
So there was a lot of conflict.
There was a lot of conflict. So now they forget the main issue. I'm here, now they are just quarreling among themselves. So who's the better one? Who's have the better doctor that they can take me to? Who can do that? Then later on, when I was 12 years, I was diagnosed with asthma. Okay, I said, okay, fine, let's go with the asthma route. Then because when the seizure happens, I used to collapse and have short breath. And then, then I went through the asthma. I followed the asthma routine and the medication and stuff. And not forgetting also giving the traditional part aside, because I also wanted to be better. Remember now, I want to be like other people, other kids. I want to enjoy. I want to play, explore like everyone, and I want to be to feel welcome, to be feel as part of the family and part of the society as a whole. But it was difficult for me growing in such spectrum. And then when I was 17, that's when I got the proper diagnosis.
Okay.
Yes, because where the reason why I got the proper diagnosis, it was one of the doctors referred me to the neurologist, and then they did the test, couple of tests, and probably that's when they diagnosed that okay, it's an epilepsy.
Great, thank you, Michael. I just, there's so many challenges he's had, right? So we're listening to being bounced around between people. You've had social challenges. So that's friendship that's affected you emotionally. You've had learning challenges you've shared with me. And I mean, even just sitting down and as he sat down, I said to him, the last webinar, you kept your eyes quite down. Now, having epilepsy, I understand these things. And he looked at me and he said, the lights are really bright and I can't look into them. So I said, thank you for just looking into them for us and being okay. So I wanted to jump, Solly. You've worked across so many cultures. You've got such deep wisdom, and I always love talking to you. Springing off what Michael said about culture, talk to us about the culture and the stigmas around epilepsy that you've experienced in various areas.
Yeah. I think essentially, maybe just to give a background, is that I think our focus most of the time is around the manifestation of epilepsy. And I think that in itself becomes a problem, because if you look at the manifestations of epilepsy, everybody is worried, what could happen. And we know all the stigmatization, and culture comes in the sense that manifestation is explained in different way. Our culture has survived where, for instance, an explanation of, the euphoria that happens, or the jacking, it's like spirits that have actually seized you. And therefore, even the treatment that comes about becomes a treatment based on trying to prevent those manifestations, which deprives, especially in your underprivileged communities, the opportunity to get to the root of what actually causes those seizures. So for me, the critical thing is actually recognizing the fact that epilepsy is a condition like any other condition which manifests itself in a different way. Cultures tend to react to to those manifestations and try and seek solutions. Because if you look at the different ways, like the churches, I mean, years ago, I was involved with a church that chained people who were having seizures or flogged them.
And you know what's scary, Solly? It's still happening today.
Yeah.
So it's not years ago, and that's why we're sitting having these conversations, because education empowers people.
Yeah. So I think it is just because I think everything that has been focused on is on the manifestation of the seizure, which is the end of the whole process. I think, like the doctor explained, that it is a function of the neurological system not functioning okay. And getting to the root, like Michael said, getting to the root of that becomes the control. And, you can live with it and avoid that. But people are afraid of the manifestations, and the manifestations are associated with a lot of things, with spirits, being seized with spirits and so on. So all the treatment, which is supposedly cultural or traditional, is focused at reading of the spirits, which becomes the problem. And the way those spirits are read, unfortunately, it's sometimes harmful to the individual and actually delays even treatment.
It's so scary when we get into the treatment of people with epilepsy, and it is fear-based. I always say, when people are scared, they do the craziest things. And the whole theme this year internationally in the epilepsy community is to stamp out stigma. And that is really to break the stigma and enable people to truly understand, when we're using the different words interchangeably, of I love how you put it, I love how you put it, when we're talking about a seizure, that manifestation, that so now what? Are you freezing? Are you able to offer support? Where do you go for it? I want to bounce to you and throw you in at the healthcare space.
Sure.
In the healthcare sector today, we have this huge gap between government hospitals and private hospitals. Now, can you just talk to us about how that space, and how is that space supporting people with epilepsy? What are the challenges? What can be done to improve? And just talking around the understanding of people getting to the hospitals.
I think in the government space, it's a matter of resources. We see people, we have limited amount of time to see people and explain these very manifestations, versus the private sector, where I have time to sit with a brain model and explain every manifestation per part of the brain that it's from. Because I think that the first thing is to understand what is happening to you. So if I offer an explanation of why it happens, then we can speak further about it. I'm in what I think is a unique position where I grew up in Alexandra Township. I studied in Natal, studied in Medunsa. And I think that brought a wealth of information in terms of approach, to cultural beliefs and how one needs to then speak about treatment. And my philosophy is we as scientists need to be honest about what we are offering. So when it comes to the root cause, I always explain around the brain model, and I get to what is called the temporal lobe, the lobe of visions and intuition and feelings and dreams and memory. And I say, this is where my knowledge ends. Okay. So if you've been told that this is happening because you are being tormented by a spirit, I as a scientist cannot then negate that. I need to provide a sort of consultation where one can then freely speak about what they think. Because I find that when we do that, we then forge our way to a solution easier by just allowing that space to talk.
Yeah.
Working in government, there's no time for that. Yeah. We've got huge patient numbers, and we just want to make sure you are symptom free. We fill out your and not because doctors don't care, it's because there are lots of people to serve.
Well, we know how few neurologists there are in South Africa, and we think we've got, I think there's just over 200 at the last count at healthcare professionals. And I mean, we say that's really small, where one of the largest countries in in Africa has one neurologist to millions of people. So it really is, we need more neurologists globally. I mean, it's an incredible speciality. I suppose one of what you're saying leads me to another question, and I want to ask really both of you ladies. You sitting on the medications, the medicine side, the scientist side, as you like to call it. Phuti, you've seen so much of South Africa from the traditional side, from the belief side in terms of epilepsy. And can you just give us an insight into your experiences of people with epilepsy from the traditional views and from what you've seen? And maybe as a scientist, we can just share in terms of how we bring those two spaces together to enable more people with epilepsy to get help and breaking those barriers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Charlene. I think, first of all, you've indicated and touched on the issue of resources and the numbers of neurologists that we have in our country and all over the world. But I believe that persons with epilepsy come from homes. The home environment, the community environment, the school environment, and then the workplace environment, and then the social environment in terms of every space where persons with epilepsy are. So we have a responsibility to actually educate. We have a responsibility to make all parents, children. I'm talking about the school environment, because he also touched on the fact that at school, how people treated him, they treated him differently and so forth because they saw something strange. So we need to, in collaboration, and that's why I can't miss such discussions, because we need to collaborate both with the medical field, both with the churches, which is the social environment, also the schools, and just every sector, but especially with parents, because children with epilepsy grow up in a home, and that's where signs, before they even can go to a medical practitioner, certain signs that will be visible and they will be known. But it's how then the parents or the caregivers respond to the child. Some choose to hide, some choose to go the route of cultural, because remember, they're looking for diagnosis, and all of that is done with the heart of, I want my child to be better, I must care. But there's lack of information. People are not aware. They don't know what epilepsy is about. So we need to increase the information and also make people aware. And the more we talk about this and involving everyone, including churches. In churches, a person with epilepsy has a seizure in church. People think it's a demonic influence or something, and they want to lay hands on them and they want to do all sorts of things. There's a lack of understanding, and hence we then end up misdiagnosing because we do not know. So the gap of lack of information, and therefore we need to increase these conversations, discussions. The more we talk about something, the more it becomes fashionable, the more people's level of acceptance is heightened, the more attitudes are dealt with, because now they are aware. Now they rise from awareness to knowledge. Now they rise from knowledge to wanting to know, even researching on how best to respond and support persons with epilepsy. So if we increase these conversations and discussions and we localize them at a very
fundamental level.
Yes, even in schools, we talk about this. We're talking now fully inclusive schools at a government level, where we are saying special schools should be able to focus on special needs in terms of various disabilities. But at the same time, those fully inclusive schools need to be prepared so that learners also know that socially, because we're not going to create, we're preparing children to become something in society. We're not going to create spaces solely for persons with disabilities, solely for persons with albinism, solely for persons who are blind, or solely for persons with epilepsy. All as we grow up with that understanding and aware and know how to support, but also how to be. And even again, how knowing you yourself as a person, because the other thing is, it's easy to say somebody is a person with epilepsy because they've been diagnosed, but most people don't even know their own status, you know, and especially because the facilities, the resources are not there. But if we release information on how to identify early signs, at what point then parents interact with medical practitioners, and we increase information from medical practitioners to also
The person in the street, to the person,
yes,
the
and
parents,
the person in the
children.
street should be able to know, because at the end of the day, you're going to go to a restaurant, you're going to go to a church, you're going to go to a school, you're going to go to a rally. And we should be able to understand and accommodate. So awareness, I'll still maintain, we need to maximize the levels of awareness and platforms of awareness, and we're prepared to support that, yeah.
Thank you, Phuti. And you've touched on so many things. I'm sure each of you are like bouncing to tap into one of the things at least. So I think one of the things that stood out for me is you speaking to each of the stakeholders from being the person with epilepsy. It's your responsibility to say, I have epilepsy. I mean, I only started talking about 10 years ago. I actually stood up and I said, somebody said, tell us something we don't know about you. And I said, well, none of you in this room know that I have epilepsy. I've been living with epilepsy since I was 8. And I've had tens and tens of grand mal seizures and many. But my point of referring to myself is that I took responsibility to tell people. And I took further responsibility to share information. And that's what I appeal to every one of you that have epilepsy, to share information and upskill yourselves, because that is how you break stigma around you. Exactly like Phuti's saying. And I think one of the things I'm tapping into here is the traditional healers, and I'm going to, maybe you've had experience. What did a traditional healer give you when you were having seizure? How did they manage? What did they, you said something like, I was diagnosed by the traditional healers. What did they diagnose you with?
The diagnosis goes back to what Soli said. They were focusing on more the manifestation of the spirit. Hence, like you remember I told you before that I was also like said I'm demonic possessed.
So they did think that.
They did that, and then they went to in terms of the calling and the lineage of my family as the royal, but it was way off than what we were looking for. So, and the worst part of it is like when I had the seizure, they were saying like, no, stand on his feet when he was his feet, and make sure that like when I gain my conscience, my body will be stiff, will be in painful, because there were a lot of people sitting on top of me, trying to stop the seizures. And the other thing was other traditionally were honest, like they say, no, we don't see anything relating to other health issues other than the spiritual stuff.
Okay.
But others, they were just doing what the traditional healers doing now. Up until we decided that we need to go to the church. We mentioned the churches. That's where also the churches lack information, lack the understanding. Yeah, because at church also I was being prayed with from different pastors.
You've been exposed to such interesting people trying to help you with your epilepsy, Michael. I want to just come back and Phuti tap in something you've said, and I'd like your feedback as well in terms of what's being said, is that you said each of the stakeholders. Now, Epilepsy South Africa is a national organisation, like everybody knows, and we're based in 6 of the 9 provinces. And we have social workers that go to the schools. They work in the communities. They go to individual homes. I wish we had more. We needed as much more capacity, but we really do amazing work in the communities. And that's how schools can invite any of the branches to come to the schools and educate the teachers, educate the children, because the more people that are speaking and teaching, like you saying, deploying individuals to enable and to upskill people, makes really a life of a person with epilepsy is much easier. Not only that person, their family, their parents, their siblings, their everything. I just want to jump in. You were looking while Phuti was talking and going, and I was quite interested here. She was talking about traditional, and then I'd love you to just, both of you really, what is being done in communities regarding the bringing together of traditional and Western medicine, or medicine as a science as we know it, And what do you think the value of traditional medicine is with Western medicine? So can I just drop the two of you in?
Can I just share, I think in my early years, working in this field, I am tempted to think of one incident that I went to a school, like primary school, with a class. I think 3 classes were combined. And within that class, there was a child with epilepsy. And she was sitting right at the corner. The teacher didn't understand what was happening. In actual fact, what they did is that they had sticks to put into her mouth, and all sorts of things were being done. So, my lesson from that is that there was a level of misunderstanding and perceptions, which you'd call cultural, where people have learned to deal with epilepsy in different ways. But those ways are so damaging, because that child that I was seeing there, obviously his destiny is that he's not going to go far. That child is obviously going to be isolated for the rest of his life. He's not going to get a job. And what has happened in society is that we create an environment where that child has got to go to a protective workshop, right? Irrespective, because the fact that he manifests that behavior, he is like seen to be not competent. No assessment is being done, right? So I think generally, people across the board have got a fear of what manifests with an epileptic seizure. But the truth is that the seizure is the end part of a big process. And if that process is engaged in, this is what the psychiatrist would actually tell us, to be able to deal with it. And when it comes to traditional medicine, is that it would help because it deals with the psyche. What I did in the past is that I would always engage with the traditional healer, make him aware that it is important for them to talk the language of empowerment, the language of affirming the person, and actually recognizing the innate, that this person could be intelligent, he could do a lot of things, but he is being impaired by this particular thing. So because of the problem of lack of facilities and so on, in most communities, your underprivileged communities, those people are destined to go into protective workshops.
Oh, it's so sad.
They are destined to go into an environment where they are being cared for. A good example is Michael. He can write a book, right? But according to tradition, he was destined to be looked after for the rest of his life. So for me, the messages that should be going on is actually affirming people with epilepsy, recognizing that it is a condition which can be controlled. And then we have medicine coming through to support that, and also having the environment to be inclusive enough to understand that they might be slow when they are having a seizure, but also to provide them opportunities to be able to advance. Not special school, not isolated place, but the environment. And that means that educators need to understand what this condition is, and to realize that they can enable people to unleash their potentials.
Absolutely.
Not focusing on the condition and its manifestation for that matter.
Thank you, Solly. I'm going to just pause, and we've got our Roo. It's so wonderful to have you here. Joburg traffic, load shedding. So I'm so grateful you made it. Thank you for enduring the stress to get here. Roo is a lady that lives with epilepsy. Very interesting story and background. And I've got to know Roo really well. And thank you for joining us today. I'm going to ask you about yourself in a short while. What I just wanted to tap into here and just get back to the traditional and the Western. But what you've said is one of the things, as a little girl of 8, that when my parents were told they had to take me to a remedial school immediately and remove me from the school because I had a grand mal seizure, my parents stepped in and said, we're not moving her. And that was the moment that has defined the rest of my life, is that a loved one believed in me. And I'm sitting here today advocating for people with epilepsy, sitting with this amazing team of people here saying, this is what we need to be talking about. So yeah, that's such an important. I wish I could give that gift to everybody in the world. But I want to ask you just comments on what Phuti and Solly have said. Traditional versus Western medicine.
You know, I think coming from I represent that Western medicine knowledge, and what the challenges we face is that firstly there is a stigma around epilepsy, and there is the perception that African culture is below us, like it's almost as if it doesn't make sense. So the way we do it is we say you have epilepsy, this is the medication you need to take and go on your merry way. And I think epilepsy requires more of a discussion. So from my perspective, once a person sees a neurologist, they've been through GPs and other specialists, and they've been through traditional medicine or alternative medicine.
Yeah.
And by the time they get to you, many times people will tell me, you know what, the family thinks this is a calling. I'm just here as just the last stop before I go.
Yeah.
So I, as a neurologist, cannot alienate my patient by not exploring that part of it, because that is a huge part. It's the social aspect of epilepsy. So if we're going to work together, I need to have time to hear what your beliefs are. So part of my consultation is, what do you believe in? Are you religious? Are you, what do you slaughter to the ancestors? Do you do all of that? And the reason is, it's not necessarily because I stand with the belief, but to create an environment where someone can say, actually, I saw so-and-so and they told me that, like, I'll say Isluan, it's an animal that has been attacking me, sent by so-and-so. Yeah. So previously, the medical profession has been very paternalistic. We sort of say, that's not it, that's, just because we don't hold that belief. And when I said the medical field needs to be honest, because when we get to the temporal lobe seizures are really scary. There's a mystique around them. 100%. You dream of things that happen sometimes. You have deja vu. It's really not, it doesn't, when it happens to you, it doesn't feel scientific at all.
No, it doesn't.
So
there's nothing scientific about having it. Right, Michael, right, Ru?
And also the fact that, per definition, a seizure, one has amnesia of that period.
Yes, he does.
And there's a cultural belief where that part is when your brain is switched off and there is communication with the alternative world from the. So when I represent a paternalistic profession, I need to have the discussion around what else a person thinks and what I'm offering. Yeah. Like I need to I don't even want to say educate, because that sounds also like top down. We need to have that discussion. I always say to people, I can't be a South African Black woman and not have people be able to tell me what they've gone through and what they believe it is. And so it's the onus is on me to create that environment. So often I say, okay, if somebody belongs to the Apostolic Church, what does the lady who prays says? Because it's somebody who prays with water and candles. Somebody believes in traditional healers. I'm like, what did Gogo and Kulu say about this?
So you understand.
And so there I'm able to be more effective, because I will explain every single part of the brain and what happens to you, what the science is. And the temporal lobe is where it gets murky now. And I'll give an example where somebody has these dreams that tap into the memory area during a seizure, and it's somebody's grandmother that comes to them and tells them of something that's going to happen. Yeah. So, and it does happen. And now, if I'm I'm in that position where I say, I'm going to give you treatment, this thing is going to stop. And some people feel like then you're going to block the gift.
And we don't want you to stop.
We don't want you to block the gift. And then I say, I'm offering control of these manifestations so that you are able to go to school, you are able to work. And I always say to people, in this day and age, epilepsy shouldn't change your life. You must be like a diabetic and hypertensive person. There are very few forms of epilepsy that have a terrible prognosis. Otherwise, you should be functioning.
Well, one of the things, Epilepsy South Africa, we are advocates to have a society where people with epilepsy it's an inclusive society and they can be fully functioning and participating individuals in society. So, Solly, can I just hang on 1 second? You hold on to that. Don't forget it, because I want Ru just to share, in a nutshell, she's quite a recently diagnosed person with epilepsy. And just maybe a summary of where your life was when that happened, and then your experiences of being accepted and in your community and the changes and the perceptions about you, and how just give us a bit about Ru.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm someone who has, I've always had epilepsy. I grew up with epilepsy. My family just thought I was a difficult child. I was a difficult eater, that perpetuated into an eating disorder. So it was like, just eat, get over it. I also battled with addiction, and for me, it was a matter of something to help me switch off. But for my family, it was, she's naughty, she's difficult, she needs to get it together. My mom went to her ancestor, the elders, to pray over me so that I would find my feet. But the reality was, it was just a matter of me trying to find some solution. I'd gone to psychiatrists, I'd gone into psychiatric facilities, but this just went undiagnosed for a very long time. For me, my diagnosis happened once I found recovery. And it was just a suggestion from someone, go and see a psychiatrist. From a psychiatrist, I got a referral to a neurologist, and then I was diagnosed with this thing. And suddenly a lot of things.
Don't you love the language? That's how people, this thing.
Yes.
They push it away from themselves. And it is. It's like, it's beautiful that you just said that, because we're teaching you. We're teaching people. Yeah, this thing. Okay.
This thing.
This beautiful integrated part of me that has epilepsy.
But the funny thing is, after getting a diagnosis, I called my mom and I'm like, so I've been diagnosed with epilepsy. She says, oh, I was diagnosed with epilepsy in 94.
What?
When I was 5 years old. It was just something that was never spoken about. It was something that has never been discussed. I didn't even know this at all, But the funny thing, I'm going to just fast forward, is having epilepsy and having a correct diagnosis and being put on medication has been the best thing that's ever happened to me, because the deja vu is gone, the feeling that I'm just, the anxiety, because I have Myanmar seizures, and it crippled my life for years and years and years, my addiction played part and parcel with that as well, because it gave me a relief and a release. So it's been a journey, culturally I was raised quite Western, and still I didn't have access to resources that would find me on the right medication and getting the right treatment.
It just amazes me, as we're talking here, I'm like listening, like we're talking about underprivileged individuals and people that don't have information. We're talking about somebody who's grown up in an environment where she has access to private healthcare and doesn't have access to information. And it's like it's why our global community is just rallying around a document that we call the Intersectoral Global Action Plan, because everything around this action plan is around education and awareness and empowering people with the how-tos and how to change their lives. So I just before I have to go back to Solly. I know you're holding and you're chomping. Look, and then it's Phuti, please.
Yeah, I just, one thing that's been triggered in me is the critical thing is, how do we integrate treatment? I think for me, you know, if I am dealing with epilepsy, is how do I stop what you said, this thing?
Yeah.
That's the most important
This thing. I love
How
that.
how it's done becomes, you know, immaterial.
Yeah.
But I think what we have created is actually that there is two areas. It's either you're doing traditionally and that type of thing. I think the two works in the sense that if, for instance, the two were working together, where that language that is being talked in the so-called Western medicine, it's integrated, where we educate even the traditional healers to be able to understand that.
Yeah.
And I've seen it working. But the problem is that there's this recalcitrant behavior of saying that we are medicine, we are Western medicine, and you are traditional.
Yeah.
And therefore, but the reality of our environments, we traverse through these. We still, I mean, a person that goes to church still goes to a traditional healer, you know, for whatever it is, and even if it's not epilepsy. So I think the challenge for us here is in educating, it's making people aware that treatment is integrated. If we are dealing with it, you know, as a psychiatrist, the fact that like our psychiatrist says that, you know, I got to understand what belief system it is, then you can be able to work and say that this is what you're doing. But in terms of medicine, this will help to you to understand that. And the two work together as an integrated force, because that's the reality. We don't have one, you know, system that is actually thriving. It's got its challenges. And then the other system can help this system that is proven it's scientific to work. But the people need to be integrated.
See, we opened today with Phuti sharing about the heritage and the cultural diversity of South Africa, and we've come real full circle to go, we're celebrating differences, and can't we bring everybody together to go, okay, an alternate medication, alternate diagnostic treatments, thank you, Solly, medicine, caregivers, family, healers. If everybody starts communicating with each other, you get an environment where that person is cared for and has choices, right? So I'd like to, Phuti, just jump to you. Is how do we take all this? How do we improve South Africa? How do we take this collective that we're getting to today from a cultural perspective? What do we need? How do we just give us advice? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. You know, as I'm listening to the different spheres and the different fields talking, we definitely now can say we need integration. We need to work as one. Because both the West and the traditional methods do work, but we're not talking to one another. We don't appreciate one another. We're not having a situation where we're able to sit. She said it rightfully to say, I go into the background. So she's looking at the traditional and the cultural background, and both the Western and the traditional, both of them, if misdiagnosed, can lead to harmful practices. So that we understand that it's not African culture that is harmful for persons with epilepsy, but it's the overall, it's the misdiagnosis, it's the miscommunication, the misinformation that leads to that. So when we create platforms to talk about epilepsy, we need to appreciate our diversity as a people, our diversity in terms of religion, our diversity in terms of cultures, the diversity, and then having an overall understanding of who we are. It's not one size fits all. And as we were sitting here and talking, and I was like, disability is not an inability.
Oh, I love it. Yes,
Albinism shouldn't be looked at as not being able, because it's not an inability. And the bottom line is, as the panelists were saying, my fellow panelists were saying, that if all is done proper, she's here, we're able to operate and to function like everybody else. If we know our status, we're able to then even support one another effectively. But the issue of stigmatization is because, like I said, there's no information, there's no appreciation, and therefore there is a them and us. It's that kind of a setup. So it's those kind of things that we need to deal with and appreciate our diversity. For me, as I'm sitting here, I would say to you that actually disability is a gift, because it opens us to another world. It opens us to another ability that when you are a non-disabled person, you might not have. If we can have that appreciation and understanding, then we would understand disability properly, because it's an imposed term by non-disabled people.
I have a superpower.
So, yes.
My superpower is my epilepsy. And I only learned 3 years ago that epilepsy is a disability.
Yes. So when we begin to understand also from the home, because every child is born of a mother or a father, and they're at home, and they're brought up from there, they're taught identification of all that. It starts right there. Yeah. And that's where the information must be. And I wanted to say that we're living in an age where information is available at our fingertips. Where there's a will, there's a way. If we really want to know and understand epilepsy, you Google, you check. And over and above that, we create groups. South Africa, we are a society that has been doing this. We create small groups where these conversations happen. They cascade into schools, they cascade into clubs, they cascade into, and we invite the medical practitioners who can spare 30 minutes of their time to be with us. We invite the churches, we invite the traditional healers, because not all traditional healers are practicing harmful practices.
That's also a stigma there.
It's also the stigmatization of
anything negative.
That then, yes, and we need to break that barrier. But it's going to take all of us understanding that we have to be intentional, and put effort into doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I may.
Yes, jump in.
I always say that out of those 200 neurologists that you say we have, less than 20% of them are Black. And we're serving a country that is 80% Black. Yeah. So there are certain nuances as a Black person that I will understand, that a Black person will be able to speak about freely without them feeling like it's a foolish thing.
Like it's a them and us
it's
again.
like
So
it's sort of, we just say, no man, this is why it happens. But we don't say to a person who says, I prefer kosher food, no, there's nothing to do, pork is fine, you can, But so understanding the nuances of a certain culture is important. Doesn't necessarily mean you practice all of the practices, but I've found that as the minority in terms of neurology, I don't have the luxury of not engaging onto, what is your background? Because epilepsy is such a contextual disease. So in Santon, it's take your treatment and that's it. But in a different environment where the elders are respected, where the elders say, this is what it means in this family, we need to integrate the care. So I need to be honest with my limitations. I'm not curing epilepsy. I'm giving you control. Whereas a traditional healer may say they're curing it. And I need to be honest with the fact that I am not a spiritual leader. And therefore, this is what I just offer treatment. And I just offer the fact that, in fact, I don't believe epilepsy to be a disability based on the resources that we have, because people can lead normal lives and we just need to explain how. That's it.
I think there's a couple of points coming out. Is that one, we do know that epilepsy is not curable. You live with epilepsy for life. It's there. We also know there's 50 million people globally that are diagnosed with epilepsy, and that's backed by World Health Organization. How that translates to South Africa is that when you look back, 1 in 100 people live with epilepsy. Work backwards on our population, and you're looking at over 500,000 people living with epilepsy, in South Africa. And then we bring it back and we're talking about how people can help, about information dissemination, about bringing different groups of people together. And one of the things that we're calling for is that everybody can get involved. And if everybody is actually contributing to information and upskilling themselves, and each of you watching us, it can be your responsibility and your way of adding capacity to supporting this conversation and to changing somebody's life for real. I think I want to just jump in here, and I'd like to hear what the two my two fellow beings with superpowers. Jump in, contribute to what's being said. I know Michael's been dying to say something. Yeah, just.
You poked some, when you said this thing, you poked some, because I was named that boy with that thing. Like in my cultural, they would say, okay, you're coming with a new thing. Then I was like, okay, how can I come up with a sickness or that? Because I don't know where it comes from. Just because of I'm the first person in the family to be diagnosed with epilepsy. So I must be sidelined. And one other things that, as you mentioned that, you said cultural something which is evolving. So coming from the traditional family and royal family, we have those elders. We have to respect them, even though you have to come up with the new ways to tell them, no, this thing is not about witchcraft. And it's not a thing. It's a condition that you can live with, contain, and live with it, live normally, like in. And as she said, as the neurologist that I met with did the same thing that you do. First thing, she asked me, by the way, it was a woman, she asked me that my background. And surprisingly for me, I didn't expect that question from a white person. Like you're saying, what are your belief roots? Before I can start with my scientific test. Then she went through that, and I said, okay, I'm more rooted in the Catholic religion, and I believe that anything that it is, by that way I said it's a block or it's a wall for me. It comes from, as you said, superpowers. So I managed to go through the road with her, telling when I'm in the seizure, I'm like, yeah, I'm in another universe. And remember I said that I gave all the perspective, as you said, we need to work together. Traditionally, I did respect the traditional way. I did follow the traditional rules and instruction, and also the Western side. And I also managed to understand that, yes, these two spheres or the departments collaborate together. Yes, if they can understand better that no, we don't have to put the blame on the other side, because some of the predicament that I faced during those processes, it was like the traditional healers pointed the finger to the Western.
I do this.
The Western pointed the finger to the traditional way.
Yeah, I want to just an observation that's coming out for me, and is that when through the webinar we've been talking about the diverseness of our country, and we've mentioned color, we've mentioned religions, we've mentioned belief systems, and I think one of the things that makes me so proudly South African, as I know each of you are, is that our resilience and our tenacity and our ability to come together as a nation. And what we do know is that epilepsy is not belong to females or males or Indians or Africans or whites. Anybody at any time can develop epilepsy.
Yeah.
And so with that bearing in mind, and what I'm hearing so actively is that what each person that treats a person with epilepsy should be doing is finding out about the whole person.
Yeah.
Finding out where they came from, and that seems to be lacking in the conversations that's happening in our treatment environment. So what I'd just add a little bit to that. We've got a little bit of time left. Phuti wants to jump in. Phuti.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think what's very critical and what we discover, especially when we in conversations about persons with neurological conditions, intellectual and disabilities, non-visible disabilities, is around the silence in our protocols, health protocols. For instance, you don't find a situation where when you look at the health card of a child, the health card informs you of what other non-visible disabilities have been picked up as the child is growing. In actual fact, in almost all the disabilities are not recorded. And as a result, they are not institutionalized into informing the future and the livelihood of whoever is going to be interacting with that health card. And that's the health card that we use when we go to schools. When children apply, you're required to provide that health card because the school must create an enabling environment for the child. And you find that in that instance, they create an enabling environment for children whose full health record is not listed. But jumping straight to when you interacting with doctors, that even the forms that people complete prior to consultation, they need to reflect all of these aspects, your background, where you come from. If we can ask, what religion are you? We should be able to ask even the other. But I think it's as a growing society that's beginning to realize and transform, those are the aspects that we need to build into all this and institutionalize them, because that gets the conversation to be mandatory. You know, it becomes mandatory when you see it there, that whether you're white or you're African, and it also kickstart that if you know that you're not familiar with a particular cultural background of an individual and that it's reflected in that particular form, then you go find out. It forces you to actually go and interact and bring in the other, you know. So it needs to be institutionalized more than just conversations.
I love hearing that from you, Phuti, because you're standing from the treetops and the Department for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, and you've got the voice, and it's just so wonderful to hear, like, this is what we need, amplified and make it practical on the grassroots to enable our practice. I mean, it wouldn't make it so much easier for you to get a document that says this is the full background of your patient that's sitting in front of you, and you'd be able to then see more and more people. And I honor you for the time you're spending with each of your patients, because it's so unique to hear a neurologist stating that. A lot do, and as you say, it's capacity on the other side of the fence, where it's just they've got to get the seizures under control and they can't talk to the person.
But you know, I think one thing to share with the public is that, you know, seizures are not only a loss of consciousness and convulsion. So people are under the misconception that that's what it is. So people think, oh, it's well controlled, but you are still forgetful. You have episodes of confusion. And if you have gaps in your day that you can't account for, if you feel you are in a conversation and you've missed the bulk of the conversation and everybody's ahead of it. So, you know, those are seizures. If it's from the vision area and you see things that are odd for that place that they should be at, seizure. If you want to speak and you have a word in mind, you can't articulate it, that's a seizure. And we need to talk to people about auras and the different types of things that alert you that the seizure is coming.
My auras have saved my life.
Yes. And people think that that's the precursor. It's already a seizure. It's a focal seizure, you know. And things like bizarre dreams, excessive deja vu, you know, those are things that can, you know, that are seizures. And I see a lot of young people, and I say, you know, to be able to do your job, you can't have something that keeps interrupting your thoughts. And if you feel like that's what's happening, that's what we offer is a little bit of control, you know, where you can now say, you know, and I speak about the premonitory phase where for 2 days you feel out of sorts and you can't explain why. And then the day after the seizure, you may miss the seizure itself. It was 3 seconds of just, you know, a clouded consciousness, but you have headaches, you know. So I have the same conversations with my headache patients, like, that's the tip of the iceberg. Why are you having headaches? You know? What's happening? So I would love people to know that there are lots of forms of seizures, and they should consult for us to explain some of them.
I'm going to just go for last comments, because we're just having an amazing conversation. I want to go on and on and on because it's such a deep, wonderful, colorful conversation. But Solly, you got 1 minute. one question I want to ask you. What are the services and communities that people in South Africa can have access to from Epilepsy South Africa?
From Epilepsy South Africa, we've got services, outreach services, where we have social workers and clinics to assist psychiatrists or medical practitioners in getting services going on. Out of those groups, people set up self-sustaining projects like self-help groups and work creation. But of most important is just the general awareness for people to live more effectively with epilepsy. As we agree that sometimes you won't get treatment, but you would actually be better off if you can control it, to access employment, to live a full life, which is the objective of the organization, to improve the quality of life and ensure that people fulfill their purpose on earth.
Thanks, Solly. Michael, closing comment.
Okay. My closing comment.
Let the audience have or our viewers a message from you. Yeah,
Okay.
closing comment.
Yes. My closing comment is there's a person before any disability, because you must not lose yourself because of the condition that you are in. You must create you yourself must create a better condition for you and your environment, your surrounding, meaning your family. You're supposed to make them learn as much as you learned. And as for me, as a person with epilepsy, I take this and I wrote the book, talk about my process, in which I hope that I want to see it in more schools.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Ru.
Hi. So I think the biggest thing is I'm really grateful that the conversation around epilepsy is happening. Like I found out much later in my life that there is even this epilepsy I thought was someone falling on the floor. You know what I mean? I couldn't be epileptic. So I'm just grateful that there's more and more. There's Epilepsy South Africa. The conversation is open and people are starting to talk about epilepsy and the fact it's a disability, and that there is, there are ways and means to have a functional life, because I think in my life was almost non-functional at a point for something that is as manageable as hypertension or any other chronic ailment. So that's my biggest
Piece of
thing.
advice to a person with epilepsy. What one thing that they could do today to help themselves?
Keep going, eh?
Keep going, eh?
Keep going. Reach out, ask for help. There are ways and means. Your life doesn't have to, you don't have to be completely destabilized. If you've got signs, symptoms, or anything from even this conversation or another conversation is tickling a part of you, get out there, get to a psychiatrist, get to a neurologist, do what you need to do. If something doesn't feel right, trust that.
Because it's not right.
Yeah.
Great. Phuti.
I'm grateful for this opportunity, the collaboration that we have with Epilepsy SA, which is part of what we strengthen in terms of working with organizations of and for persons with disabilities, and including Epilepsy SA for persons with epilepsy. But to say that it's for this reason why this year we in partnership with Epilepsy SA and other organizations, publishing a manual that we want to put out there so that people can know and identify at a basic level to an advanced level, and where to go, what to do if they determine that at home they might be having a person with epilepsy, or not even knowing what the problem could be. But we say there must be a go-to document, whether online and everywhere, which could also begin to spark conversations to say you have a manual which has been validated by organizations, the information is there. You read that manual, you look at it, and then you begin to discuss on how learners should be interacting with other learners who may have been diagnosed with epilepsy who are in their schools, and what support of utmost importance to provide and to give, and how duty bearers should create an enabling environment, even in workplaces and everywhere for persons with epilepsy to actually flourish and do well like everybody else, than to be stigmatized and attitudes and perceptions and so forth. Because you'll be surprised, those things go into records, even performance records of individuals at work, because people are misunderstood.
Yeah.
So we're developing that manual that we want to
And it's such a
produce
privilege
as
to be doing it with you,
standardized
hey?
manual. Yes, and we're going to make sure we publicize it. It sits in the libraries. So the process is on. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And thank you for working alongside Epilepsy SA. It's always just so wonderful to have you as right there with us, speaking the same language, Phuti. Solly, closing comment.
Well, look, epilepsy, it's a condition. It can be put under control. Treatment is available for what it is in the country with the limitations. We need to explore it all. I suggest that there is more integration in treatment, that it's not like in silos. And then overall, I think people with epilepsy have got a space. You're a good example of that. And I think what we do, in Epilepsy South Africa is to affirm that and to provide systems that people can live full lives, including getting proper treatment.
Wonderful. Yes, well, last comment.
I just want to say, saying that one is living with epilepsy doesn't mean there's no hope.
No.
There's hope. And there are so many medical advances from epilepsy surgery to different combinations of drugs. And, I think we need to be made use of. People need to understand that when we diagnose you, we walk the walk. It's a journey. And people who are willing to walk that walk with you, you need your village, and part of it is a neurologist, I think, because that's what we love to do.
So I'd like to say thank you to each of our 5 amazing panelists that have joined us today. And it's just been, I've loved this conversation, and I hope that each of you, our viewers, if you're going to be watching this at another time, truly just enjoy and take the value of the richness of this conversation out. And I'd like to just say, contact your nearest branch. Epilepsy South Africa is based in 6 provinces. Go to our website, look at the resources, and become a member of our organization. Join us, and we can help you. We can help your families. We can help your loved ones. And you help those people around you by sharing information. Thank you so much. It's Charlene Castle, and I love being with you today, and you take care. Thanks.